Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the OVM quarterly meeting. I'm Susan Alpole. Before we begin, just want to go through some of the logistics. We are recording this presentation, and I'll be sending a copy of the slide deck as well as a link to this recording to everybody probably tomorrow or Wednesday. We ask that you keep your webcams off and audio on mute unless you're presenting. We will allow webcams and audio to be enabled once the Q&A begins, although probably you might want to keep audio on mute unless you're speaking. During the presentation, we're asking that you submit questions via the chat feature. And then at the end, you can use the hand raising feature when we get to the live Q&A. So now we will turn it over to Vincent Maccozzi.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's OVM quarterly outreach meeting. We have a pretty exciting agenda planned. Members of the OVM, SSPO, OSD sourcing, and DOER have some great content for you today. On the agenda, we'll have sourcing and contract updates, information on the rollout of the state surplus property software, a review of Executive Order 594 and the future of the state fleet, an overview of what's in store for utilization reviews, information on vehicle use in a hybrid environment, and lastly, we'll have some time for Q&A. As you may be aware, there have been some personnel changes within OVM over the past few months. Recently, I've taken over as the Director of Fleet Policy, and Stephen Powers has stepped into the Maintenance Analyst role. Included in this slide is an updated list of names and contact info for each portion of our program. So please feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any questions. So this slide outlines the current Green Fleet Committee members. Most of these individuals are either presenters or members of the audience. So a big thank you to the Green Fleet Committee representatives that are here with us today. And this slide outlines the vehicle-related contracts and associated contract managers. There have been some changes over the past few months, so I would encourage everyone to review this information. Additionally, for those of you who are interested, contract user guides can be found by searching the contract description in either mass.gov or Combis. These documents have proven to be exceedingly helpful, and we would encourage all users of these contracts to review those user guides. And with that said, I'll pass the baton to OSD sourcing own Dave Sargent.
Hey, thanks, Vinny, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. My name is Dave Sargent, for those of you who don't know me, although I think I know most everyone that's on this call. And we're just going to take some time to run through some updates on VEH 110, VEH 111, the new vehicle acquisition contracts. Chelsea from DOER is going to touch on a few models that are available for both contracts in the alternative fuel vehicle space. And then McKenna will touch on VEH 113 and some important updates there. So first, hot off the press, we are having our buyer kickoff event for both VEH 110 and VEH 111 at the same time. We're going to combine it into one event. And if you want to mark your calendars, that's Friday, March 11th from 10 to 11:30. There's a registration link that you need to go through to actually get it on your calendar and to be able to participate in the virtual meeting. Hope to see as many of you there as can make it. What I'll do is kind of give you a high-level overview of some of the things that we'll touch on during that kickoff event. So I think we start with 111, and I know this isn't used as much as 110 or VEH 98 was used previously, but to touch on this just for a minute or two, this is basically the replacement for VEH 93, although the team did a really good job of putting together a more comprehensive contract that includes more equipment that people were looking for. So previously, VEH 93 was really limited to front-end loaders and dumps. And we did have some other pieces of equipment that were kind of scattered on VEH 98, which caused its own type of confusion at times. So the team did a great job of making VEH 93's replacement, VEH 111, much cleaner, much more comprehensive. So not just dumps and front-end loaders, we have a whole host of heavy-duty vehicles and equipment. So 7 categories. You've got your trucks with a variety of upfitting applications. You've got your heavy equipment for backhoes, wheel loaders, dozers, et cetera. I won't go through all of these. Suffice it to say that we have everything that we had before on VEH 93 with some additions. One thing to note in particular is our trailer category, category 7. That's not something that we've historically had on either of the vehicle contracts, and a welcome addition for VEH 111. One unfortunate drawback of this, or not drawback, but something that we weren't able to secure like we would like to, are street sweepers. Not sure how many people on this call are interested in that, but we weren't able to secure any bids for the reverse tricycle style street sweepers that many people are familiar with. Though we do have street sweeping applications in category 1 that can be mounted to a truck chassis. So that's the overview of VEH 111. Again, replacing VEH 93, much cleaner scope and more comprehensive with more options. And like VEH 93, this also includes options for parts as well as service. So it's not just the vehicles or base assets themselves, but you can purchase standalone parts and components as well as preventative maintenance and repair as well. So if we go to the next slide, touch a bit on VEH 110, which I think people are more interested in this space. So basically cutting to the chase, I figured it might be best to just cover, how is this different from VEH 98? So first and foremost, I touched on this in the last slide, it has a more clearly defined scope. Previously, VEH 98 had your passenger vehicles, trucks, but also was the home for a lot of strange pieces of equipment that could not be found on VEH 93 that now are available on VEH 111. So this contract is limited specifically to 4-wheeled vehicles. You're not going to find your Fireflies or parking enforcement vehicles on this. There will be 4 or more wheels in the light and medium duty space, up to and including 26,000 pounds GVW. So the cleaner scope is definitely something that is great about this contract, and the team really worked hard to get a real defined scope at a category level, which we'll talk about in a moment. The other big thing that was really different about this contract was we made it a bit more competitive than what we've done in the past. So unlike a bid that's more of a qualified list where you meet mandatory requirements and you're sort of afforded a seat on a contract, we really challenge vendors to sharpen their pencil, give us their best price, the best supplier diversity commitment, the best that they have to offer in terms of alternative fuel vehicles. And we really made it a competitive bid. We specified a target number of awards that the team wanted to make for each category, whether that was sedans or minivans or cargo vans, et cetera. And we made awards based on the best of the best vendors that competed in that space, based on a lot of hard work that the team went through to put together some objective evaluation criteria, looking at price, looking at supplier diversity commitments, looking at business experience, et cetera. And so by nature of the way we constructed this contract, it was more competitive. And we hope also that it has better pricing and more transparent pricing. That's something that a lot of people in this group have advocated for over the years, that we really want pricing that's based on dealers' cost, not necessarily MSRP. And that's what we were able to secure as part of this contract. We do have some added parameters for ordering and delivering, which I'll touch on in the next slide. The master vehicle list is largely the same in format, but the team again worked really hard to make this more efficient for buyers and vendors. So rather than the thousands of lines that you are traditionally used to, basically this vehicle list is to be a bit more streamlined, so that one, we're not looking at vehicles that aren't fleet appropriate at all, but two, making sure that we're making the best use of space on a vehicle list, and understanding that if a base vehicle is reflected there, obviously there are a lot of trims and option packages that can be had with that base vehicle. there's not the need for vendors to list all of them. In some cases, you will see multiple listings of the same base vehicle to the extent that it's really valuable for people to see option packages that are common. But even if you don't see that, the rule of the road is that if the base vehicle is present on the master vehicle list, that vendor can sell any version of that vehicle, any option package, any trim level associated with that base vehicle. So that makes it more efficient. And we really focused on driving best value, both in the short term, as I talked about with making it a more competitive bid, but also I think there's some long-term implications in having the vendor and manufacturer community better understand what we're going after as a Commonwealth. I think that the added requirements that have been placed around supplier diversity and certainly reducing carbon emissions with Executive Order 594 that we'll talk about a little bit more has certainly bolstered some of what the Commonwealth's goals have been over the years, and that's only added more voice. And so I think that, while some vendors didn't necessarily make the cut this time, we welcome their bid for the next go around. And I think they have that much better of an understanding of what we're trying to do as a Commonwealth and really making this a competitive best value contract. So if we go to the next slide, won't spend a lot of time here other than to say that ordering and delivering in the quote process is very similar to what you're used to on VEH 98. I touched on the master vehicle list. I will say that right now the list, in addition to vendors only needing to reflect a base vehicle, the list looks a little bit sparser than we would otherwise expect to see just based on all the supply chain issues that have been going on for well over a year and continue into 2022. And so part of what we've asked the vendors to make the contract less confusing and more efficient is to only display vehicles that are actually available to order or otherwise secure on their list. So as new vehicle order banks become open, vendors will be adding additional vehicles to the list to make sure that there's more options or as many options as available. But right now, we're still waiting for several models order banks to become open again, which is why you might see a little shorter of a list than we would expect in normal times. Like previously, the vehicles have to be delivered new, and there's requirements around how many miles can be on the odometer. I won't belabor the details there. They're in the contract user guide, other than to say that we made the details a little bit cleaner and in a way that makes more sense, I think, to what people usually experience in reality. And like previously, the vehicle should arrive with registration plates, passing inspection sticker, as long as the information was received up front by the buyer or OVM acting on behalf of the buyer. And as always, full fuel level, regardless of whether that's a traditional ICE vehicle or we hope an electric vehicle would have a full charge. The third key is no longer required. Part of what the team agreed to is to make sure that, again, we're getting the best price and no more or less than what we need. So for agencies that still require a third key or a fourth or a fifth key for that matter, you can still certainly order that from the vendor and secure the discount that we have based on their bid commitment for an added key. It just basically falls in line as another option for the vehicle. So for those who don't need a third key and just are fine with the standard two, typically, there's no need to pay an upcharge or have the contract price reflect an upcharge of that third key. So still available, but not required unless your agency requires it. Quote process, again, very similar, other than to say that the quote form itself has been enhanced. There is a buyer tab and a vendor tab to make it clear who's responsible for what. And it's a little bit more flexible to cater to a lot of subject matter experts, like most of the people on this call, who really know what they're going after, know exactly what options they're looking for, upfitting applications, et cetera, versus those who may not have a ton of knowledge in this space and just know that they need a light duty pickup truck with a plow on it. So it really caters to both types of audiences and everything in between. As far as the need for multiple quotes, same as VEH 98, if the master vehicle list reflects the vehicle you're looking for and it's associated with the vendor that you're looking to purchase it from, there's not a need to solicit quotes. You can make that purchase directly from the vendor of your choice as long as it's reflected on the vehicle list. We would always, or I at least would always encourage that you get multiple quotes. I think that's a good practice. But in those situations, you don't need to do that. Where you do need to do that, though, is when the cost of added options, upfitting, et cetera, any type of customization, whenever that accounts for more than a quarter of the total purchase price, we do ask that entities get multiple quotes to make sure that they're getting the best price and the best value in what they're looking for. Obviously, when you get into a lot of customization, it can be hard to get a lot of transparency with pricing with very unique and sophisticated options in the upfitting space in particular. So getting quotes when it gets to a certain level just adds us another layer of protection there. And with this audience, I think pretty much everyone is required to use combis, but that is the preferred quote and order method in any case. It does help us track compliance, among other things. I know one of the things that has been a challenge on, frankly, most statewide contracts, not just vehicle-related ones, but not excluding vehicle-related ones, are getting quotes from vendors when you solicit them in combis. And so we have some added parameters in VEH 110 and VEH 111 that makes it really clear what the expectation is for vendors to reply to quotes and what the time frame is for doing that. And so by using combis, it really helps us gauge, are they complying with that time frame? Are they responding at all? And then we can take appropriate action when we evaluate them for renewal opportunities. And with that, just touching on the contract categories. So again, there are 12 distinct categories on this contract. Each vendor has been awarded anywhere from 1 to, I think we have one that has, let's see, 9 categories, that's the most. But they are distinct categories, each with their own specifications. I won't go through all of them here. You can read the bullet points, but I think the biggest takeaway here is that the categories 1, 2, and 3, sedans, minivans, and SUVs, they are to be hybrid or better, which we're defining as a hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid, battery electric, or fuel cell electric vehicle. This is a really big push that the team made to make sure that we're aligned with the goals of the Commonwealth. And the team felt that while there might be some challenges, particularly in this environment where, frankly, getting vehicles in general is a challenge, this is the best pathway forward to make sure that we're meeting our goals and that we're really a leader in this space. But aside from that, we have light duty trucks, medium duty trucks, a whole host of vans, buses, vehicles for law enforcement activities, and vehicles primarily designed for wheelchair mobility. And so we have just as much, if not a little bit more than what we had previously, but they're just defined in specific categories with vendors that are really specialized and gave us the best bid in each. And so if we just sort of take one more view of that, this is available as an appendix in the contract user guide for VEH 110. And this just gives you an overview of the 14 vendors that are on contract, the OEMs that they're authorized to sell, and which categories they have been awarded. And so once again, the team did a great job making sure that we got a really good mix of application types, different variety of manufacturers, and good geographic coverage as well. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea, who's going to touch on some models that are available now. And like I said, we only expect that this will improve as time goes on, both with the technology improvements that are happening and just supply chain issues in general easing up. So Chelsea, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, agreed with all of that. I think just to follow up a little bit more regarding both of those contracts, 110 and 111, we wanted to highlight some of the changes that you can expect to see on the model front. Some of these, I think some of you are already familiar with, but there will be new things here and coming soon, as Dave noted. Like Dave said, we worked hard. The sourcing teams worked hard to ensure that there would be ample alternative fuel options, particularly to support, Executive Order 594, zero emission vehicle requirements that begin soon, starting in FY23. He's going to speak to those requirements a bit later on. But again, do just want to highlight some of the pertinent models that you'll be able to find on these contracts that support those fleet electrification directives. For VH110, as Dave noted, only full electric, plug-in, hybrid, electric, and hybrid models are available in the sedan, SUV, and minivan categories, though there are alternative fuel within many of the other categories as well, and we'll only see more of those as models come out over the coming years. In terms of battery electric models, there are a variety of options for sedans and CUVs, as well as some larger options like the Ford E-Transit cargo van, an electric microbus. The Mustang Mach-E as a CUV has an all-wheel drive option available. And I think what you'll really be seeing over the coming months and year or so are various battery electric SUVs, larger sizes coming out that almost all of them have all-wheel drive capability. So that's pretty exciting. As a reminder, there are incentives available for full battery electric vehicles. Mass EVIP offers a $7,500 incentive for vehicles up to 8,500 pounds, and More EV Trucks has rebates or vouchers that start with vehicles that are 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight and up, with the incentives increasing with those larger weight classes. And these incentives can really make some of the battery electric models very cost competitive with their conventional fuel counterparts, which is exactly what we want to see. Next slide. There's a much more robust set of models in the plug-in hybrid space, plug-in hybrid electric space, particularly for larger SUVs and SUVs that have all-wheel drive. We know this is a space that has been lacking, and many of our fleet vehicles sort of need this capability and size range. These models have a smaller battery range, that can be coupled with a hybrid, that are coupled with a hybrid gas engine. Though for shorter trips, like if you're driving under 50 miles in a day, you could easily only run on the electric portion of that vehicle. The catch is that to really leverage the benefit of a plug-in, you need to make sure you're actually plugging them in, which can be done in even a 110 outlet, right? That would fully recharge that battery overnight. So it's not a large barrier. You don't necessarily need new infrastructure. Again, Mass EVIP incentive is available for these. It's a $5,000 incentive instead of $7,500. Again, can really help drive down those costs from an upfront perspective. Next slide. And I think for places where BEVs or plugins cannot meet a specific vehicle's needs, there are a host of hybrid models that can provide the same vehicle utility as their conventional counterparts, but with a much better efficiency. One of the newer models is the Ford Maverick, which is a smaller pickup truck that gets substantially better MPG than its sort of conventional fuel sisters. And I'm sure there will be more to come for these in various categories as well. Next slide. VH111, yes, I almost forgot. So for VH111, we also pushed for this. I think there are less alternative fuel vehicles in this space. However, we did get some options. So there are some cabin chassis options in the electric vehicle space as well as buses. I think this is really about sort of, overviewing the catalogs for what's available, also engaging the vendors for what's available in their offerings in this space. And there are incentives for these vehicles as well for this larger vehicle class through More EV Trucks. They come in the form of vouchers, and they can be quite substantial for some of these models. So please investigate it or reach out to us for more information about that. Next slide. Because there are a lot of different models on many contracts, there are also options through VH102 and FAC116 for sort of neighborhood utility models. We've put together a little bit of a guide that lists these with some pertinent information, lists the vendors who are offering them, which contract you can find them on, and any particular incentives that might apply. So the link is there. Hopefully this can act as sort of a one-stop shop if you're confused as to where to even look or where to go to. So. And last bit for me, I think since, EVs are newer to many of us in general, we have developed a calculator we talked about before briefly that helps quantify the benefits associated with EVs and help show how, these models stack up against their conventional fuel and hybrid counterparts, but also how they compare to other EVs. So to do that, the calculator compares on a model to model basis, utilizing electric vehicle options that are currently available on VH110 and compares them to a variety of models and technologies that are either on contract or on the market more broadly, just for comparison. And you can go to the next slide here. Once you select sort of your comparison model, some very basic assumptions, the calculator provides two main outputs, right? It is a model. First, it provides a model specification comparison, which details all of the things sort of listed here, right? The vehicle type, the actual technology type, its electric and or full gas range, the drivetrain, whether it's rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, also along with combined MPG, and then a bunch of specifications around upfront costs, estimated annual fuel costs and maintenance costs, and then kind of allows you to see them next to each other across those different specifications. Next slide. And then it also gives you a couple of visualizations, which I think for me is really nice because numbers can be overwhelming. And so this is sort of comparing at the top a battery electric, then a plug-in electric below that, and then a conventional fuel model that are all sort of in that similar class. And then sort of shows you the different breakout of what's contributing to these total cost of ownerships over the lifetime of that vehicle. And so I think, what we always sort of reemphasize is that the battery electric and plug-in options, I mean, right now, some of these options are as cost competitive from an upfront cost to begin with. But over the life of the vehicle, these can actually end up saving money because they're much more efficient to operate. And so it gives you sort of this breakdown next to each other. And then last but not least, of course, it also gives sort of an emissions comparison breakdown, same thing with the battery electric up top and the ICE at the bottom. I think it's pretty easy to see that the emissions benefit that you get from these electric vehicles over time. So really simple calculator, we encourage you to use it, explore the various models, certainly reach out with questions. We do plan to embed this in the vehicle request workbook so that come FY23, particularly when the first 594 ZEV requirements kick in, you will have something at hand to sort of compare some of those options that are on contract. And with that, I believe I am passing it to McKenna.
Thanks, Chelsea, and good afternoon, everyone. I am McKenna Petak, and I manage a couple of OSD's fleet contracts, but today I'm just going to focus on 113, the Fleet Management Services. So this went live back in October and is replacing the VEH 84A contract that expired at the end of 2021. If anyone is familiar with VEH 84A, there's a few new features and some differences on 113. There is a third category that was added, and I feel many people do not know about. This category is risk management, and it has the ability to customize risk management programs based on individual account needs, and it also facilitates the ordering of electronic motor vehicle records. MVRs have a consistent point system across all states, and there is the ability for several types of requests of MVRs, whether it be scheduled, ad hoc, or instant-based. And there's also online driver safety training. I would also like to point out that our sourcing team had really pushed for further cost savings on the new contract and got the price down from the previous contract by $1 per vehicle per month. This might not seem super substantial, but after 10 years of service, inflation, prices increasing everywhere in today's world, it is really impressive, and it definitely adds up to a significant amount for the buyers. Our returning vendor from 84A is Fleet Response, and our two new vendors joining us are Element Fleet and Merchants Fleet. This isn't on the slide, but I would like to mention that there is a buyer kickoff event April 7th at 1 p.m. I just scheduled it, so there's not too much out about it yet, but there will be more information to come. And that's all I got today. So let me know if there are any questions on anything 113 related, and I'm going to hand it over to Ted.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, and I probably know just about all of you by this point, but I'm Tim Bonnell. I'm the Surplus Property Coordinator. I'm just gonna take a quick minute, just kind of give you a kind of a recap of what we've been working on in the Surplus Property Office and maybe how we might be able to help benefit you. You can go to the first slide. So over the past year or so, one of the things that we've really been working hard on is creating a new website to advertise our available surplus property. If you've ever looked for surplus property before and gone to our listing, you would see what it is, which is really, it's exactly that. It's just a list of property. It'll say, you know, we have 3 desks and 4 chairs and 5 file cabinets, and it doesn't really give you a lot of information, which makes, you know, acquiring something more difficult. So what we did is we've been building on this new website. We procured it and we've been working on it with our vendor. And it's going to have pictures, better descriptions, more information about the items in general for you. So hopefully we can move more property. Another thing that we talked about as well, and it doesn't really happen too often, but another use for this new site when it's up and running is occasionally we may get a vehicle or a piece of equipment or something like that through Westboro that is still in good shape and could be redeployed possibly to one of you, and we don't really have a good way to push that information out to you now. So we might utilize this website as a way to post those vehicles and pieces of equipment too when they do come through Westboro, put them up on here and maybe save you from going out and purchasing something brand new if maybe we have it in Westboro. Again, it doesn't happen often. The stuff that ends up there is deadline usually for a reason, but occasionally the vehicle or piece of equipment or a trailer or something like that might come through that'll be worth putting up, and we would do that utilizing this site and try to get it to you guys. You can go to the next slide. I don't know how many people here that actually ever report surplus property to the office. I know there's definitely a few of you here, but probably not a lot of you, so I won't spend too much time on this. But we're also going to change the way you report property to us as well that you have available. This doesn't apply to the vehicle process, but to the more normal surplus property process. For those of you that do it now, you know, it's a bit of a manual process, filling out forms or writing letters or emailing us and calling us and trying to get stuff moved or posted or approved for disposal or things like that. The new software that we have, the new portal that we have will allow you to post that right through here to us. So it's going to make the turnaround times quicker. And it's going to allow you to also track everything that you send us for reporting purposes and audit purposes and things like that. So if you are somebody that does report surplus property, I would love to hear from you. Drop a note in the chat or send me an email, because I would love to set up some time even with, you know, a one-on-one or with a few of you where I can kind of show you this in more detail and you know, and how it will apply to you and what you'll have to do going forward at some point. So let me know about that. But I look forward to showing it to you when we roll it out. And then the last thing, I know I touch on this all the time when I speak on this, is the federal surplus property program. And I would love to see more people try to take advantage of it. The hard part about where we're located and, you know, being in the Northeast and things like that is we don't have, you know, a bunch of Army bases and things like that around us that they do in other parts of the country. You know, you look at Texas or Colorado, New Mexico, places like that, they go through federal surplus property like crazy because they have it all available to them. But we do have agencies that take advantage of the program and do well with it here in Massachusetts. And the way they do it is that, you know, they go into the federal website on a pretty regular basis. They set up want lists in there, which you can do, where you can go in and say, okay, I want to be notified if a certain kind of truck becomes available, or, you know, if a plow becomes available, I want to be notified about it. And they set their want lists up in there and they get notified, and we're the first ones to get it. So I would love to see more people just even get credentials and get access to the program. So again, if you're interested in getting into the federal website and just seeing what's available, let me know. I have applications on file for probably every agency that's here, but they do expire after a few years. We may have to do a little bit of paperwork, but it's not that big of a deal. I can get you access to the site, and you can go in and just see what's out there and what's available and get your profile and your want list and stuff set up. And if there's a way that we can get stuff for your agency that, you know, it doesn't involve you going out and purchasing something brand new and spending a lot of money, I would love to help you do that. And that's my spiel. That's really all I got. I'll be passing it over to Vinny.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it. So we'll pivot a little bit from there. So in the next few slides, we're going to review Executive Order 594, the goals and how we plan to get there. So we can move to the next slide, please. So within EO 594, there's a comprehensive set of goals designed to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions within the state government by 2050. And one of the main focuses of this order is the greening of the state fleet. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment to outline a number of the key points that I've pulled from EO 594, just briefly go over it. So two key points. State agencies are being called on to expand upon existing strategies for the Commonwealth to lead by example in making new additional reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And secondly, all agencies shall assess and implement strategies to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts when planning for and executing projects related to the design of construction, operations, and maintenance of state facilities, and the procurement of goods and services, including vehicles. So as it pertains to vehicles, all agencies shall collectively work to meet greenhouse gas emissions targets by substantially reducing or eliminating emissions from on-site combustion of fossil fuels in buildings and in vehicles. And secondly, prioritize strategic electrification of buildings, central plants, and vehicles, and or use of carbon zero fuels. So if you can move to the next slide, please. The following targets are set forth within Executive Order 594. And as you can see, within the next 3 years, we should have reduced our burning of fossil fuels by 20% against the 2004 baseline standard. 5% of the fleet should be zero emissions, and we should have 350 operational charging stations on state properties to support the fleet. And so looking at some of those numbers, they initially may not seem like a lot. So when you look at Section 2 and 5% zero emission vehicles in 2025, that may seem like a pretty easily obtainable goal. However, we're at right now for the OVM managed executive branch fleet about 0.75%. And getting that up to 5% is going to involve huge investments in time, huge investments in infrastructure, ordering vehicles in a timely manner. So there's a lot of work that really needs to be done between now and in 2025. So, you know, I stress a lot. I know the team stresses a lot. Start early. I would even go one step farther and say it's important to start now. These goals only get more aggressive as the time progresses. You can see it goes from 5 to 20 to 75 to 100. These goals only get more aggressive with time, and making sure that you're ahead of the curve is going to be a pretty important thing for all of the agencies. So we can move to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. So where and how to implement the change. So on a secretariat and agency side, we recommend that you review your budgets and ensure proper allocations of funds for electric charging stations. EV charging stations is going to be a big one. It's a bit of a time-consuming process. It requires a lot of planning. So as I mentioned earlier, start now, start early. Additionally, we'd recommend that you identify high-value facilities for those charging stations. And that's definitely something that OVM can support with some telematics data. So if you're interested, I definitely would recommend reaching out to myself or to John Martin to get some of that information. And it's best to have the infrastructure in place before placing a factory order for a BEV. And so, like I mentioned, as that, you know, for that reason, we would recommend that you start planning for that infrastructure installation now. So on the OVM side, the team is looking into both the electrification and the right sizing of the fleet. And we'll be using telematics data to perform that as we reach out and review this with all of the agencies to help identify any areas of opportunity. So the thought process is with the introduction of zero emissions vehicles into the fleet and then proper right sizing, we can get to that 5% by 2025 goal that's set forth in EO 594. So once again, I'll continue to plug it. We strongly recommend agencies and secretariats start early and remain ahead of the curve. OVM and our partners are happy to discuss these initiatives with any of the secretariats or agencies looking to lead this charge. So with that said, we've set up a poll to help gauge some interest on the topics. So in a moment, you might notice a poll pop up in front of you. We just appreciate if you could quickly give us some of your feedback. So. And Susan, you can let
Yeah,
me
we're
know.
at 40%, 44%.
Perfect.
Give it another 15 seconds. 46%,
Awesome.
50%. 51%. All right, looks like I'm going to close it.
Okay.
Yeah, 53%. I'm going to close it.
All right. All right. Thank you, Susan. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the presentation over to John Martin, who is going to begin the utilization review side of our presentation. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Martin. I'm the Telematics Program Manager for the Operational Services Division of the Office of Vehicle Management. And as Vinny was saying, today we're going to go over the upcoming utilization reviews across the executive branch. So utilization reviews, our office is going to begin scheduling these reviews with agency fleet managers during the second quarter of the calendar year of 2022. What these reviews are going to look like: we're going to set up an initial meeting with the fleet manager and any other relevant fleet personnel to go over the telematics data. What we're going to be looking at is really just utilization patterns of each vehicle. We're able to tell, specifically how many miles, how many engine runtime minutes, how many trips, how many days the vehicle was utilized. We're able to gather all of that information and just come up with specific numbers on what the percentage of time that the vehicle or asset is utilized. And so if necessary, a follow-up meeting is going to be scheduled to review the function of each underutilized asset. So we want to try to target vehicles that really aren't being used as much as we think they should be, or for that matter, vehicles that just aren't being used at all, and try to figure out a way to mitigate that and either increase the utilization or take action in other areas. So there are really three primary questions that we're going to be asking. The first, in the context of underutilized vehicles, the first is, can we repurpose the vehicle? This is especially relevant for seasonal assets or vehicles that are only used for certain functions or certain times of the year. I think the nature of a lot of seasonal assets, you're talking about plows, you're talking about heavy duty equipment, is they're very valuable. We're talking about trucks that are close to $100,000 in value that sit for 8-9 months of the year. It's not to say that they don't have a very important special function that only details they be out, or dictates rather that they be out and about for a few months of the year. But the way that we're looking at this is we have extremely high value assets that are pretty much sitting around getting no utilization of any type for large portions of the year. And we're looking to change that. So is there any way that we can repurpose these assets so that we can use them in other areas and just get any sort of value from them? The second question that we're going to be asking is there any opportunity for electrification? Now, there may be certain scenarios where maybe a vehicle does a lot of trips, it doesn't necessarily do a lot of miles, it sort of fits the traditional profile for what would make a good BEV. We're going to look to see if there's any possibility, as Vinny was just presenting on, is it possible to electrify the vehicle instead of removing it, or just in general, even if it is a regularly used asset, would it be beneficial to electrify that asset? And then vehicle retirement is the most obvious one. If there is a vehicle that has extremely low utilization, does it make sense to retire that asset? As we all know, things have changed. And my colleague Stephen Powers, in the following slides, rather, we'll talk about sort of life in this new COVID environment. But again, does it make sense to retire the vehicle if the asset now for the past couple of years has had next to no utilization? So going forward for seasonal and part-time assets, we're requesting that they remain online year-round. We distributed battery guidance on a number of occasions, essentially saying that, you know, if we could keep the vehicle online so the battery doesn't go dead, or I know that there are agencies out there that disconnect their batteries and they store them away for several months at a time. We're just requesting that the batteries remain connected and that the vehicles are started every so often so the battery does not go dead and we are still able to communicate with the telematics device. There's two primary reasons for this. The first is valuable assets need to be accounted for at all times. Our office needs to be aware of where a vehicle is, even if it's not, you know, in its peak season of use. We'd like to have some visibility into where the asset is currently located, and the avoidance of maintenance issues. So it's obviously not ideal to have a very expensive asset sort of just sitting in a shed somewhere collecting rust and dust for 9 months or whatever the situation may be. We want to avoid that, keep the units sort of active all year round in the hopes that we will eliminate some of these maintenance issues. So why are we doing this? Current utilization levels. So based off current policy, approximately 9.7% of our vehicles are hitting acceptable utilization patterns. That's obviously unacceptable. You know, with telematics, it's given us an ability to really understand utilization at a much deeper level. So I believe the current policy only really captures miles or, you know, dictates a mileage threshold. With telematics, we're able to understand a lot more about utilization. So we're able to understand, you know, engine runtime minutes, trips, days utilized. There's a number of different ways that we can now really get a much better and more complete picture of how an asset is being utilized, which is good because, you know, there are a lot of situations. Let's say, for example, there's a construction vehicle that really sort of just, its function is to be on, like the engine is running, but it doesn't necessarily put on a ton of miles. So it provides a lot more context to the way that the vehicle is utilized. And that's important to us. So adjusting for telematics, the executive branch is still less than 60% compliant. And so the reason why we're going to start to do these utilization reviews is try to figure out, is there a way to optimize these assets? You know, can we repurpose assets that are only used for, you know, during certain times of the year? And just generally, that's what we're looking to do. So the goal of the reviews is the optimization and elimination of all underutilized assets. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them at the end of the presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Powers, and I am the business analyst for the Vehicle Maintenance and Repair Program. And today I'll be discussing vehicle use in a hybrid work environment. So COVID-19 changed a lot regarding how the Commonwealth operates to provide services to its constituents. Agencies were faced with the challenge of how to keep providing high quality services amid an unparalleled health crisis with increasing restrictions and lockdowns, staffing shortages, and supply chain issues. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this timeline is just meant to serve as a form of thought exercise to recall all the adjustments that agencies had to make to continue meeting their missions through their pandemic. So I'll be asking some questions to call to mind the modifications you made. Back in the very beginning of the pandemic on March 23rd, 2020, Governor Charlie Baker ordered all non-essential businesses to cease in-person operations. How did this impact the completion of your organization's mission? Did your agency go fully remote? Was there a hybrid approach, and what did that look like? Were you able to provide the same level of service from a remote location? What were the main impediments you faced at this point, and are you still facing them now? For OSD, we moved to a fully remote environment, including the auctioning of our surplus property. And while it wasn't an easy transition, it was important to keep our services available to the public as well as other state agencies. After 2 months of operating during the shutdown, Governor Baker released a 4-phased approach to responsibly reopen the Massachusetts economy, get people back to work and ease social restrictions while minimizing the health impacts of COVID-19. Did your agency start to transition back to operating services as it did before the pandemic? during which phase OVM started to go back to the office 1 day a week in the summer to increase the effectiveness of our communications, especially regarding group meetings and program goals. We also had to start looking into how our functions changed and if we still had the same requirements pre-COVID. After considering our switch to a hybrid environment, reviewing the utilization of our vehicles via telematics, and discussion of our current job functions, OSD made the decision to turn in our pool vehicles, which were redeployed for use at other agencies. We recognized that our vehicle needs could be met through rental vehicle contract and personal mileage reimbursement when required, that our vehicles would better serve another agency in accomplishing their mission. The current state is fully reopened as of May 29, 2021. Does your organization operate in the same way that it did prior to March 23rd, 2020? You can go to the next slide, please. So this poll, what percent of your agency is working in the office or in the field full time, is just meant to kind of get some information for us regarding whether you're still kind of working in that COVID environment or, did you go back to operations pre-COVID? And if you just want to let me know when those results start coming in.
31%, 33. Give it another 20 seconds. All right, 51%, a few more seconds, and then I'll close it. All right.
Thank you, Susan. Could you go to the next slide, please? So most medical and scientific experts believe that COVID-19 will continue for the foreseeable future. Many agencies discovered telecommuting is sufficient for most of the work they're doing, and a return to pre-pandemic norms is not expected. While telematics data collection began during the pandemic, many agencies returned to close to normal operations in the late summer/early fall. And data from these months show that overall fleet has significant amount of underutilized vehicles, even considering the additional metrics that telematics allows us to incorporate. So now is the optimal time to analyze current and expected activity to better right type and right size the fleet, as redeployment and replacement efforts could help all agencies. There are supply chain issues we're facing right now where new vehicle orders are not as fast as they once were. So making sure that the vehicles you currently have are being utilized, and if they're not, they should be being utilized by another agency, is very important. Could you go to the next slide, please? So some questions to ask. How have functions which previously needed a vehicle been completed over the last 2 years, such as offsite meetings? Will these alternative methods continue? What critical functions must be served with the use of a state vehicle? Would one vehicle type serve multiple functions, including shifting seasonal duties? So some things to consider when right typing a vehicle, the number of seats, the cargo space required, the special equipment, the frequency and mileage of trips, and if a battery electric option is something that could be used for this usage type. And when right sizing, some things to consider are how many of each type needed at once. Do you need 3 pieces of heavy equipment all running concurrently, or would one be able to satisfy that need? And to consider other options, consider the rental rideshare contract and or personal reimbursement. And now we are moving to the Q&A portion of our presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. And thank you to all the presenters today. I appreciate all the effort that you all put into this presentation and all the information that you've been able to communicate in the last roughly hour. So we have some pre-submitted questions that were sent to us along with the registration or along with registration to the quarterly. So what we'll do is before we jump into some of the questions I saw come through in the chat, what we'll do is we'll answer what we have pre-submitted, and potentially those could answer your question. And if not, you're welcome to put something in the chat and we'll get to them in the order in which they came in. So we'll just jump in right here. Are agencies able to increase the amount of overnight or domicile requests? Let me just move this. Overnight and or domicile requests they submit to assist with creating efficiency in a hybrid work environment. So first things first, to start off, the calendar year 2022 domicile request process is currently underway. OVM last month sent out all of the information to executive branch secretariats on domicile FY or CY22. So that's currently underway. If you think you have a domicile need, I would strongly advise that you reach out to me immediately because we are in that process as we speak. And part B of that answer, for ad hoc requests, agencies may submit an overnight travel request form to OVM with a written justification documenting the operational efficiency gained by taking a vehicle home. We wouldn't want to just grant a long-term overnight travel request for a vehicle to be taken home. We want to do it on an ad hoc basis to ensure operational efficiency, but make sure that that vehicle is actually on state property as much of the time as possible. So if you have any additional questions on that, you're welcome to reach out to me either at the end of this meeting or separately. And going into question 2, this is something we hear a bit of. So we're experiencing battery drainage issues in vehicles with telematics devices, even though the vehicles are being driven and the batteries are relatively new. How do we get this remedied? So first things first, what we hear a lot of is that you put a telematics device in and now the battery in the vehicle doesn't last as long. And that's factual. So the telematics device does draw a very small amount of current off of the battery. However, it's not enough to kill a battery within 14 days, 21 days, somewhere around there. So we've set out some guidance depending upon the vehicle and the upfitting that we recommend that vehicles be driven between 45 minutes between 10 to 14 days to ensure that the batteries themselves don't die. Now, there are some very, very unique situations, and they've been single digit numbers, maybe 4 or 5 out of the 3,000 plus assets that we've installed telematics in, where there's been issues with the telematics device communicating with the vehicle. And what I would say there is if you've gone through all of our battery guidance, and we'd be happy to share it with you if you don't have it, but if you've gone through all of our battery guidance and continue to have issues with the battery in the vehicle lasting 10 days, please reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to work with you and a vendor on contract to help try and get some of this remedy. Go to the next slide, please. So question number 3, I'd like to connect with other fleet managers to discuss best practices and solutions to common issues. Can I get a contact list from OVM? So first things first, I think it's fantastic that this individual is looking to investigate best practices and discuss common issues. However, OVM would want to be leading that conversation and a participant within that conversation. So any fleet managers that are willing to participate or interested in participating in a best practices discussion should contact OVM. We'll review the interest as a whole and potentially host something that would help agencies learn from each other. So great idea to whoever sent that suggestion in. Question number 4, how does a facility purchase an electric vehicle? So there are 2 answers to that particular question. So part A, BEV and PHEV, so battery electric and plug-in hybrid options, are included on VH110. Dave had done a great job outlining some of this, and Chelsea also had a fantastic list of what's available. So check back in some of the slides previous to this one. But the facilities must include the EVSE installation in their EV purchase plan. And part B, to investigate this further, you should definitely contact Cheryl Cushman or Karen Rasnick, as they have a ton of information that they can send your way or share with you to help make the acquisition of a BEV or PHEV a bit easier. And then part B, if a facility is looking for an EV specific to grounds use only, which would not be on public roadways, there are many options on FAC 116. And you're welcome to go take a look at that and take a look at the FAC 116 user guide that's on mass.gov and Combis. So, Next slide, please. All right, so question 5. We need to have a vehicle, we need to have vehicles that are no longer in service removed for proper disposal. How soon can we do that? So once again, 2 answers. We can do one of 2 things. We can have the vehicle, either you could drive the vehicle out there if it is safe, or we could have it towed to OVM's retirement lot in Westboro. So that's the first option. If you have a large number of non-drivable vehicles that are all in one location, we can discuss an online auction with Ted Bunnell from the SSPO to see if we can coordinate something that's a bit more conducive to the number of vehicles that are on site there. So definitely 2 options. Either way, the answer is either immediately or in the relatively near future, we can get those vehicles properly disposed of for you. So whoever sent that question in, please reach out to me directly. If I don't hear from you, I'll find out who sent it in and I'll reach out to you myself. And then number 6, how are we supposed to deal with the vehicle shortage and fewer vehicles on contract, which we are allowed to purchase? So before I start diving into that, I'll tie into something that Stephen mentioned just a few minutes ago. We're all in this together, right? And the vehicle availability is the vehicle availability. It is extremely difficult to order vehicles now. The timelines are tight, the production schedules are tight. We've been singing this since day one. Get your vehicle orders in early, because there's no telling what could happen to the supply chain to cause some disruption. So, but Stephen did mention it. There's a right sizing effort that's going to be occurring within the next few months, year, et cetera, depending upon the order in which we get to these agencies. If you have unutilized vehicles due to COVID or due to a change in your organization, it is mutually beneficial for everybody to retire that vehicle and then potentially redeploy it to an agency in need, right? We're all the Commonwealth. We're all in this issue together. We're all trying to solve these problems together. There's a lot of fear that if I give this vehicle up, I may not ever get one back. And that's not necessarily true. OVM does a lot with justifications and things of the sort. So if your current business model, because of COVID, you don't need a particular vehicle, retire it. If in a year or 2 years, the business model changes and another vehicle is needed, it's a matter of a justification, well written and submitted to OVM. We'll go through the process and we can take a look at getting you another vehicle. So I'd like to try and steer everybody away from the kind of the hoarding of vehicles to try and retain that vehicle count within their fleet, and do what you can to help support the agencies that are around us that are struggling. So I'll also jump into the answer here. All agencies are experiencing delays, which I mentioned, working with OVM early to identify vehicles which are available to factory order, and understanding the production lead times for various models is recommended. I touched on that. VH110 continues to offer a large breadth of vehicle options. So there are things on contract. You may just have to be flexible in regard to what we can get. But as always, contact Karen, contact Cheryl. They can tell you what some of the lead times are looking like, what the production schedule looks like, et cetera. So we'll do our best to help support you guys in all of these, all these endeavors as we try and get through the production issues. So move to the next slide. I think we've hit on all of those questions. So let me go move into the chat. I see one in here. So before we continue on, I'll take a look at it. It says, as far as utilization goes with COVID impacts over the last 2 years, loss of employees, et cetera, are there factors going to be considered as agencies work to gain back new employees and return to a more normal operation? So absolutely. Data is one piece of the puzzle, and understanding what's in line and how those vehicles are going to be used in the near future is definitely important to us. However, if there's going to be 1 year or 2 years between when things start to return back to normal, as I mentioned, it's important for everybody as a whole to retire that vehicle, redeploy it within the Commonwealth until things start to return back to normal, which we can more readily acquire, employees, more readily acquire vehicles, etc. So I hope that answered your question. And Susan, I don't know if there's anything else that came through between
I'm
now.
not seeing anything. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, please, you could raise your hand or put it in the chat.
I did get a couple messages from people interested in surplus property information. So for those people, I will be, I'll send you a separate email about that.
Great.
Oh, we have a raised hand from Jim Polak. Jim Pollock.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jim.
good afternoon. Vinny, so talking about repurposing vehicles, like if they're not being used to the full extent like they were pre-pandemic. I know in the past, like if you got rid of a car, it was almost nearly impossible to get that car back in your fleet. So will that policy change a bit? Like if we give up, I'm not saying us, but anybody gives up some vehicles, can they rest assured when the time is needed that they can get those vehicles back?
So yeah, absolutely.
So
that was never really a policy. What ends up happening is when a vehicle is removed from the fleet, to increase the fleet size requires a well-documented justification for that increased need. And what we've seen a lot of is if that justification can be presented and does have all of the data around with it, increasing the fleet count is something that we've done. Agencies have come to us and presented new programs that they have to offer, new needs, et cetera. And as long as everything's in line, we can go ahead and get that fleet count adjusted. So yeah, I would definitely tell everybody on the call, it is not set in stone. We will definitely take into consideration the justifications that you send over, and we'll definitely take into consideration whether you've retired a vehicle 1 or 2 years ago because of COVID. So yeah, our goal here is not to make things difficult with getting the fleet count correct, but making sure that there's actually a justified need for it, and expending those funds makes sense.
okay, thank you very much.
I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you.
Anybody else want to raise their hand?
We'd love to hear from you. All right.
Oh, we have a hand raised from James Cassidy.
James Cassidy. James, how are you?
Good. How we doing, Vinny? And
A long time. I hope you've been well.
I'm doing all right, sir. I'm sorry I got on late. I had to meet with the secretary, so I got on a little bit late. But in seeing the questions that you had in the chat, I've got a little concern myself on the battery situation with the telematics.
Sure.
We're dealing with presently, just had to get one. We've got 2 trucks that were due to retirements, and we're repurposing, and we're waiting on hiring of people and so on and so forth. So 2 of the trucks were sitting idle for a couple, probably 3 to 4 weeks. Both went dead due to the telematic aspects. And I'm not sure, I might have missed some of the conversations earlier. Are we looking at other better systems or units that might not be drawing so much on the vehicles?
Sure. That's a great question. So to answer the last part of that, no, we're not investigating any additional telematics technologies at the time. It's important to understand the telematics devices themselves only have the ability to draw a certain amount of current off the battery. So they don't have the ability to draw the power like if a light has been left on inside the cab. So knowing the milliamp draw off that telematics device, there's calculations that have been done that show how long a standard size battery would last with a telematics device in the vehicle. A lot of the times what we've seen, and this is probably 90 to 95% of the time, you have a slightly older battery in a in a condition that's not really conducive to great battery operation, such as extreme cold. And then you add a telematics device on top of it, and then you let it sit. So yes, a telematics device is going to shorten the lifespan or shorten the amount of time a vehicle can sit stagnant, but it's not going to be drastically shortening it to where you can't let the vehicle sit for 10 days. If a vehicle's sitting, 10 to 14 days unused, we would 100% recommend that you go in, you start the car, maybe you drive it around for 45 minutes to an hour. That will solve almost all the issues associated with the device. If there are situations, and they've come up very, very seldomly, if there are situations where the telematics device is drawing large amounts of current off the battery, we can figure that out through one of our vendors, and we can get it fixed. But from what you're describing to me, I would be very confident in saying, if you ended up replacing that battery with a new battery and driving the vehicle once every 14 days, your issues should subside almost instantly. And if they don't, contact me. I'd be happy to dig into it. The other thing that's important to mention is I definitely understand some of the frustration that comes from the change in how you're able to use your vehicles because of the telematics devices. However, it's giving us information on how the vehicle's used. It's allowing us to help build justifications for you guys, and it's also tracking millions of dollars worth of state-owned assets, which is one of the extremely important things. We have all of these vehicles throughout the state, and knowing where they are, knowing how they're used, and it is a highly important thing. So we do understand that there's a little frustration from that, but having new batteries in the vehicles and driving them regularly should alleviate all but 95 to 98% of your problems.
Okay, well, and I agree with you, Vinny. I have no problem with the monitoring. I am totally in agreement that, and I've explained to all of my staff that are operating vehicles that these are not your own vehicle. This is owned by the Commonwealth of Mass, and you need to utilize that and follow the rules of the road. And that does help us in looking at all of the data that we are collecting, and I'm good with that. I just have those concerns where we're seeing the batteries getting beat up a little bit, and I was just wondering, are we looking, at future thoughts of a more, I'm not going to say more, but a newer technology possibly that is not drawing so much on the battery systems? That's pretty much where I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, just to answer your question again, no, we're not investigating any other technology, nor do I think there's any other technology on the market that's going to draw less of a milliamp on the battery. Eventually what will happen is, I can't speak to when, but you'll see manufacturers start building telematics devices into all the vehicles that are sold. That may be something that could help alleviate some battery issues, but I don't see that being, in the immediate timeline here. So why don't we do this? Why don't you send me a list of the plates that you're experiencing some trouble with? And I would be happy to get with our telematics team and the maintenance team and see if we can make some recommendations to help alleviate some of these issues. And then if those recommendations don't bear fruit, then we'll dig into the actual telematics devices themselves and see if there's an issue.
Not a problem. Thanks, Vinny. I appreciate your help.
I appreciate it. No, thank you.
We have two questions in the chat, and then we have Jim Pollock's hand raised. So question regarding telematics and trailers. Why do trailers have telematics if the vehicle towing them is on telematics? Is it more or less for GPS purposes?
So we're getting awesome questions today. So we are installing telematics on trailers of certain sizes with certain equipment. And it's done, once again, just to track state-owned assets. The thing that happens a lot with trailers, because they're non-motorized and because you can disconnect them from the vehicle, they end up being one of those things that ends up potentially being misplaced. We've seen a lot of cases where a trailer ends up, beside a building, behind a building. They're difficult to find at times, which may not be your case, but it helps to identify where that trailer is, how it's being used, and if for some reason, if it's been misplaced, we can find it pretty easily.
All right, and then another telematics question. Just wondering if with the number of devices installed, will we be seeing a decrease in per month per vehicle telematics cost in the near future? Hoping so.
So that's another good question. I'm gonna maybe toss that over to John because I don't want to misspeak here. But what I will say is tied back to what McKenna said earlier with the VH113 updates, that as a whole, what we're looking to try and do is, as best as possible, is reduce the cost of operating the fleet. So she mentioned a big win with the VH113 contract where we reduced the monthly per vehicle per month charges, excuse me. So that does help alleviate some of the monthly costs there. But John, if you can, you're welcome to jump in here and answer that particular question about the monthly telematics charges.
Sure. Yeah. So the current contract runs through May of this year, I believe. So it only runs through the next few months. I believe the contract is a cooperative and it's being reviewed, is my understanding. We're going to have conversations with the vendor and potentially negotiate a new deal. Currently our deal is very competitive for a fleet of this size. I have not personally seen a better negotiated deal, through other states that I've been in contact with. And a lot, the reason that we went with this vendor is because a lot of the other offers that we got out on the market were significantly higher in monthly subscription charges. So I can't speak to what the new deal will be in May. We're going to have to open those conversations really very soon here. But I would just to answer your question, it's sort of a variable. It's unknown right now, but I would keep an eye out for the new contract that's going to start in May.
I think part of that too, she had commented that regarding the batteries, they must be 5 years old or younger, just from our own experience.
Yeah, so I would actually say that's very accurate. And just to kind of just discuss a little bit more on the battery situation. From my perspective, what happens is I get a lot of emails and phone calls saying, we think the telematics device is draining the battery. The first thing that I do is look at the fleet utilization, and I would say in over 90% of the cases, it does not adhere to the battery documentation that we have created and distributed. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do when I get that email is pull the utilization on the unit for the last month plus maybe 2 months to see if the vehicle is being used often. And it doesn't take, a complete absence of utilization for the battery to be weak. So if you're only starting the vehicle, once every 3 weeks, and it's a vehicle that really just kind of sits around, and in the winter months, it gets very cold. Eventually that battery is going to get very, very weak. And then also to Caroline's point, I think she's the person who put that comment in the chat. If the battery is 5, 6, 7 years old and that type of extremely sporadic utilization is occurring, then eventually the battery will die. So it also has been my experience that our best bet is to have batteries that are really 5 years or younger. And so if I see that the utilization is adhering to our guidelines, but the next thing that I'll do is pull the maintenance records, or I'll request our maintenance person pull the maintenance records and try to figure out when the last time the battery was replaced. And oftentimes, again, it's 6, 7 years. And at that point, we'll recommend that the battery be replaced in the unit. And to this day, I have not had a situation where the battery being replaced did not solve the issue. So in 100% of cases thus far, it's either been the absence or very, very little utilization, or it's been the condition of the battery. As Vinny was saying, we did have a few instances where the telematics device wasn't communicating properly with the vehicle. Now that doesn't have anything to do with how much current it was drawing off the unit. It just, for whatever reason, the scripting of the device was not communicating accurately with the vehicle. And in which case we sent a technician back out. To replace the device. But again, if anyone has concerns, just send me the plate number and I'd be happy to look into it. I can send it to the vendor to do an in-depth analysis to make sure that everything is well with the device. And again, if we need to, and we need to get a technician out there to replace the device for whatever reason, we're happy to do that.
I'd
next
also
we-
just like to add that if your vehicle also has additional upfits, such as a plow or other items that could be drawing on that battery, then you may need to utilize that vehicle more frequently, as the telematics device will just kind of add to that draw that's already happening from your upfits.
Next, we have Jim Pollock.
Yeah, sorry, guys. I got two more questions and I promise I'll be done after that. So just curiosity, how often does those vehicles ping to talk to the server or whatever? Is it like every 2 minutes, every couple hours? How often does that happen?
Yeah, so the telematics devices, when the vehicle is off, it pings the satellite once every 12 hours. So that's 2 heartbeats a day. It'll just check in with the network or the cell tower and just sort of let the cell tower know that it's there and it provides its location. When the vehicle is on, depending on what the vehicle is doing, the device reports anywhere from 2 minutes to 60 seconds. But if it's, it reports location data every 2 minutes, but it will report speeding data every few moments. So it's capturing all that information and it's communicating. But when the vehicle is on, the battery is in a state of being used and being charged. So the only real risk of battery drain is when the vehicle is off. But again, it's only twice a day.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, we're seeing some significant drainage in our cars. So I've been doing some research. Have any of you heard or used the solar panels that you can put in the window, in the windshield, and then to plug it into the lighter to feed that battery a little bit?
Jim, to answer that question, in a previous job, yes, we use them frequently. I've actually discussed that option with, and I'm willing to investigate it with anybody who'd like to buy a few of them and test them out. But for some of our seasonal vehicles, I had proposed that, hey, maybe we should investigate this. But the problem is, you hang the solar panel in front of the windshield, you plug it into the cigarette lighter, and the vehicle gets covered with snow and isn't used for 14 days, and the solar panel doesn't charge, doesn't trickle charge the battery, and we're pretty much in the same position. But so to answer your question, I have experience with it. I would be happy to work with you to see if it works for your fleet. It's definitely not going to work for everybody, but in your case, if you think it will, let's team up a bit, do some investigation, and maybe we can help some of the individuals on this call that are having some issues.
Okay, yeah, because that's something I was going to buy like one of them or two of them and to just test them out. And I understand the whole snow issue, but I think that'll be a lot less than, nice. That won't happen as often as nice days. So I think it would be a plus for us. But like I said, we're going to test it first.
Yeah, some of the newer vehicles, when the key is in the off position, will break contact or will break connection between your 12-volt plug and the battery. So you may notice that it works on some of your older vehicles, but it doesn't work on some of your newer vehicles. So it's definitely not going to be a 100% solution 100% of the time. So, but let's take a look. I'm happy to dig into it offline with you. Sure.
All right, thank you.
Another question in the chat. Are you noticing that the battery issue is more common with hybrid vehicles? We're having issues with the batteries if the vehicle sits over a holiday weekend. One vehicle is only 2 years old, so it seems odd that it could be a battery issue.
Yeah. So from what I know about the about the hybrid vehicles, is they do have a much smaller starting battery. I'll use a Prius as an example. The Prius has a much smaller starting battery in the trunk, but 2 days does not seem like something is right. So once again, I'll go back to the same thing. Why don't you send me some of the information on that particular plate, and we can do an investigation. But even if, like John mentioned, this telematics device is pinging twice a day when the vehicle is off. So the amount of current that it's even capable of drawing at that frequency wouldn't be anywhere close to enough to kill it that fast. So definitely thinking that that should probably go to one of our dealer vendors to have the vehicle looked at and find out what's going on. But happy to take a look into it on our end before you go out and send it out to a vendor.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
Vinny,
yes,
just to hop in and add to that. I would certainly, before you reach out to a mechanic, certainly feel free to do so if you'd like, but I would encourage everyone who's having a battery issue to just reach out to me directly. And if there is some sort of issue that I want to notify the vendor about it and have them look into it, they have the ability to communicate with the device over the air and just make sure that that device is functioning properly and provide us with a little bit more information that they're privy to on their end. So please, if you're noticing something, just reach out to me and I would rather get out ahead of it. So thank you.
Great, fair point.
Any more questions or hand raising? Not seeing anything?
Comments, complaints, anything?
Kudos. We'll give it, I guess we can give it another, another 60 seconds if anybody thinks of anything. So we'll run it up to 2:32 and 30 seconds. Don't be shy now. All right, I was gonna run it a minute, but man, a minute feels like a long time when you're sitting here, you're just waiting. So with that being said, I'll last call anybody has anything they want to discuss, raise your hand. No? Okay. Just want to thank you all for attending. Thank all the presenters for their information. As always, we're here to assist in any way that we can. So please reach out to us directly if there's anything that we can help with. I think there's probably some housekeeping items that Susan or Karen would like to go over before we exit. I just wanted to thank everybody personally for the amount of time that you guys spent with us this afternoon. Okay, Susan,
So the
Karen.
resource slide will be included, and I'll be sending out the slide deck and copy of the presentation probably tomorrow or Wednesday.
Fantastic. All right.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.